Yeah, so we have got our managing director, Mr. Bob Repass, who has been in the industry since the early 90s, right? And he has done $3.5 billion in note transactions over the years. And he is going to talk today about, well, this is the fourth in a series of how to recapitalize your bank or how to continue to build your bank. And Bob is going to share with us a program that, will show us all how we can supercharge that recapitalization. So, Mr. Eddie, why don't you and Bob come on and let's talk about building that bank.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So got Mr. Repass here.
Yep.
Good to see you, Joe, Brian, everybody out there.
Now, Eddie and Bob are a little bit tired. They told me they went up on the rocket with Mr. Bezos yesterday. So I don't know which was which as far as the two people that accompanied, but I'll let them talk about that if they feel the need. But
Man, they got a lot of press over that, didn't they?
Just a bit, right?
Not all great press, right?
Yep, that's right.
So we have I'm excited about our show today. We have something that we think is really industry specific. And Bob, just to renew a little bit, Bob is managing director of Colonial Funding Group. I met you when you were originally at Metropolitan.
Yep, back in 1991.
Yeah, and then Bob and I did a lot of business together, and when he was at the Associates, and then also Bayview,
right?
And you've been at Colonial now about 8 years.
Almost 9.
Almost 9. Right. So a long time. So I think you've done a really good job, Bob. Of you've lived decades in the business.
Right.
You've read different cycles and different opportunities. And so you've unveiled a lending program where somebody can take a portfolio of notes. It could be houses, right, but you could take a portfolio of notes and pledge those as collateral for a loan.
Correct. Yeah. We felt like there was a void in the market when folks were looking to recapitalize. They had the options of selling their loans or maybe even selling partials on their loans. But when they did that, they lost that passive income that their whole goal was. So how are they going to maintain some of that while still getting additional capital to go purchase new assets to add to their portfolio? So we rolled out our asset-based lending program where you could pledge all or part of your portfolio and borrow against that, giving you the ability to raise more money in order to build your portfolio while retaining part of your cash flow. Now, part of your cash flow will go to debt service on your loan, but you'll still retain part of it. So the void in the marketplace, there's some investors, Eddie, that are just what we refer to as unbankable, right? They go to the bank, they try to borrow against their notes. The banker, you basically have to spend weeks educating them about what the note business is all about. Finally, their light bulb goes off and they're like, yeah, I think that sounds good. And then comes the dreaded, well, I went to the loan committee. Yeah. And the loan committee just couldn't wrap their mind around lending against notes. And 2 months down the road, they're like, well, I don't think I can help you. Well, we know the note business, right? You and I have been in the note business 30, 40 years. So we know what it is. We're very familiar with the collateral of pledging the notes, how our security is going to be. So we've made an easy program where you can pledge your current assets in order to buy new assets.
Yeah, the recapitalization, just from my experience. So when you and I did a lot of business because you represented institutional money back then, and I was out finding people with a portfolio of notes.
Right.
In fact, I closed well over 1,000 portfolios of notes that I later sold to you, right? And what I found is the best operators in the business were good at creating seller finance notes, but they always later down the road faced the same issue. And that issue was specifically that people run out of capital.
Liquidity.
And so that was a big underserved market that you recognized.
Yeah, and we see that all across the board. It's anywhere from a small individual investor to a professional seller finance entrepreneur. even to small capital funds. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of capital and it's time to raise more money. And we spend a lot of time telling people how to go raise private capital and different ways and strategies of doing that. But also there's ways to leverage your existing portfolio, right? If you have a portfolio of, let's say, $500,000, $1 million, and you want to leverage that in order to multiply your portfolio, then instead of, selling loans, just borrow against those existing loans. Yeah. And that gives you the ability to recapitalize and still have the interest in your loans.
So the next thing I think was really critical, Bob, you looked at your staff, and that wasn't a misstatement a while ago. You have bought $3.5 billion with a B,
right,
in seller finance notes. There's nobody in the industry that's ever done that. Then you've been the guy in the corner office that was responsible for that book,
right?
And then you have guys on your team below you that have an excessive amount of experience. So when we were talking about the possibility of this, what I've met from being in the field a lot, I've made literally thousands of field trips with people that own notes, and they tell this story of dealing with their community banker. And so the community banker's a friend, a good guy, and they go to church with him, or they, are in some kind of community group together and stuff. And they sit down, they spend several weeks making him understand what they do. Right. And then all of a sudden he goes back to loan committee, and the loan committee gets that deer in the headlights look, right? What is it? And then all of a sudden, if anything ever happens at the bank, if the loan officer leaves or the president of the bank leaves or whatever, then all of a sudden they find themselves in a position where the lender has the money, but they don't have the industry knowledge and experience to accept that being a good business.
Yeah, and I think that's important, having the experience. One thing I'll add to the bank, which happens that I've seen happen in the past, is even if you get past the loan committee, then all of a sudden a year later, that bank gets sold to another bank or gets bought out. And then
the bank examiner shows up.
Right. And they're like, well, we're not real familiar with that business, and we're just going to stop that.
Yeah.
And they're going to call your loan due. So we feel like there is an opportunity there for investors to leverage their portfolio. So basically, Eddie, if you had cash flow coming in each month of $8,000 and you wanted to borrow money, you may give up $4,000, $4,500 of that cash flow, still keep the remaining part of it. That part would go to cover your debt. You'd still have some cash flow, and you take the capital that you borrowed and you go buy more loan, and you replace that cash flow with the new loan payments anyway. So it is a way to leverage that. And, we've seen a lot. You can do it in your self-directed IRA.
Yeah.
Right. If you bought the loans in your self-directed IRA, as long as you're borrowing from that entity, and you may want to shed a little light on how that impacts your self-directed IRA, but there is ways to leverage it regardless of the entity that the notes in your portfolio are held in.
Yeah, I mean, we would want to make sure that you were clear about, the UBIT tax, but it still could make sense. Or, by the way, Bob, if you had it in a 401k, there's not UBIT.
Right.
So, we're not giving tax advice here. We're just saying that we've dealt with these issues a lot in our own retirement accounts. And so it could be any kind of an entity. And that's what my next question was, who is your customer, Bob? We call it your avatar, right? Who really do you see as your prime person that you would work with?
I would say it's going to be someone who owns between probably 10, maybe 100 notes in their portfolio. Okay. Once you get over that 100 notes, you become more what you say bankable, or you're able to raise private money where you can borrow that. So it's probably a smaller note investor, somebody who has a dozen loans, maybe they have 30. It depends on their capital. Now, we're going to look at loans typically at a minimum of $200,000. So it's not somebody who's going to borrow $50,000 against their note, and it's multiple notes. It's your portfolio. You're not going to pledge one note, and borrow money against that. So it's that small time, mid to small investor, who has the assets like you referred to earlier. The people used to go out in the field and you would meet, and they would have 30, 40, 50 seller finance notes, whether they originated themselves or whether they bought them and built their own portfolio, and they're out of capital. And typically you would say, well, do you want to sell the loans? And you would buy from them, and then you would sell them or keep them. Well, now we're coming out with a way where they can keep that.
They don't have to discount their note, and they still get the money.
Right.
And that's what you and I talked about a lot is, it's like I bought 1,000 portfolios from operators in the field. Well, that's a lot, right? But the problem is I found out that when they sold their portfolio, Bob, they sold their business, so to speak. And then all of a sudden I wanted to go buy a portfolio from them 5 years later or 10 years later. And they were maybe doing something else because they really kind of sold their income. And so we thought it was like, what a better idea if you could lend somebody money,
right? And
they didn't sell all their future income. And, down the road, they may want to sell some of the notes, but maybe they just needed money to go buy the next deal. And, so they didn't need it. They didn't need to borrow the money for, 10 years necessarily.
Yeah. And it's another option for them when they're looking to recapitalize.
Yeah.
Right. We've seen instances in the past where somebody may have 50 loans. They may borrow against 25 of them. They may want to liquidate some that they've held on for a long time and just sell those straight out and sell that portion in a whole loan trade and then borrow against the other portion, raising capital two different ways.
Yeah.
So they're able to do that. But we have tried to streamline the process. So if someone is looking to do that, it's very easy to get started. First, all we really need is a schedule of the collateral, which is basically a spreadsheet of your loans, right? And then a basic application of what entity they're in, how long you've owned the loans. It's a two-step process to get the ball rolling. Once the loan's approved, it's just typical due diligence, right? We value the collateral, the notes, clear title, and we're ready to roll. So it's not, as you would say, going to the moon in order to get this program rolling. It's really two-step process up front. If all looks good, then you start due diligence. And that's what we do. That's what our team, our back office does, whether we're buying loans or loaning against loans. It's our operational due diligence.
I've spent 40 years in the business, and I would tell you that if I would have had the availability of a company that would have done this, that would have had a simple, easy process. I mean, it is a process. You're not lending the money irresponsibly,
right?
But you understand the product, you understand the flow of it, and you understand essentially how the operators think, right? You've dealt with so many of them, literally thousands over the years,
right?
So you know how this guy thinks, and you with that, I would say that this would have been a game changer in my business to grow it a long time back, and I'm just thrilled to see that you've come up with something that's so practical and so many people really need to do it.
Well, you mentioned a minute ago when people would sell their business, right? This gives you the opportunity to continue to build wealth, right? You're not selling off your business. You're not selling off your portfolio and got to start from scratch again, right? You're leveraging it in order to build your portfolio so that you can continue to build it and generate wealth. And I think a lot of folks are going to see that benefit. And, we're looking forward to getting more deals in the pipeline. And, I think there's a lot of folks watching today that I think can benefit from our program.
The one last thing, Bob, though, that I found is that your team is so experienced and you have done so much of this yourself that it's just almost a natural fit that you're also going to help them create better notes, more efficient processes with servicing and compliance and all the things that maybe a small operator doesn't feel like he has the resources to do well. And just because you have such a vast amount of experience doing it in the past, I feel like your clients are going to benefit in ways that they never even thought they could benefit.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, our staff, you mentioned earlier how the folks under the Colonial umbrella, the experience that we have, how they can tighten up the due diligence, the operations, the asset management piece, the cash flow management as those payments are coming in. I think there's a benefit that's not even thought about when you're just saying, hey, I want more capital. You don't realize some of the extra benefits you're getting from doing a program like this.
Yeah.
You guys, if you're interested, you can reach out to ablp@colonialfundinggroup.com. And, we'll be glad to kind of share the information. The one thing, again, just to clarify as we wrap up, you are borrowing against your existing portfolio in order to generate new capital. So it's not like I want to borrow money to buy this note that I don't own yet. Okay, so you're not doing that. You're borrowing against existing assets to buy new notes to add to your portfolio. It's ABLP, Asset-Based Lending Program, at colonialfundinggroup.com. Or you can hit us up at NoteSchool.com/TV, and we'll get that information over to the Colonial team and work with them as well.
That's great. Joe, what do you think?
Well, I think this is going to be a game changer for a lot of folks, right? It's what we've talked about, and I know that's been one of your dreams, Eddie, and I know Bob as well, as far as putting that into place. And it's just kind of the next step, as you said, in building your business, keeping your notes, but not having to sell them in order to recapitalize. And that's what the theme of this month has been, is, recapitalizing and building that bank one loan at a time. So